Hi there, and welcome to Brianne Aldcroft's Constructivist online lesson plan for ETEC 530. I'm doing a screencast because my website is password protected for student safety. I made the social network for English 10 as my final project for ETEC 532. I've not yet used it with a group of students as I am on leave right now. I wanted to create my ETEC 530 lesson plan in my social network site to help me figure out some considerations I've been struggling with, such as, what are the affordances of my platform and how should I use them? How will I incorporate Constructivism into my site? How will I manage students? How will I manage content? How will I incorporate online learning into the face-to-face classroom? Preparing this lesson plan has helped me answer these questions to some degree. The lesson plan I've created is for an introduction to poetry lesson for English 10, and it has two parts. The first part will be done in the computer lab in face-to-face time, and the second part will be done at home as homework. To begin, I will have students in the computer lab and hand out poetic devices to them that they will know from grades 8 and 9. If they don't know these poetic devices, they are free to trade with somebody in the class or they can look it up online. Once students have logged into the social network using their own login and password, I'm going to go over instructions with them, and instructions are kept in the class log or the clog under today's date. Approximately November 22nd is when we will be doing this lesson. And again, there's 3 tasks that students need to do, and only task 1 and 2 will be revealed to them right away. And task number 3 I will post at the end of the lesson as homework. I'm including task number 3 here only for the purposes of my screencast. So to begin, task number 1, it says go to the discussions page, and under poetry, go to Introduction to Poetry, and then what is poetry anyways? Using the poetic device you received in class, write a definition of poetry in 5 to 8 lines. Under your poem, identify the poetic device you used and briefly explain how you used it. Task number 2 asks students to comment on 3 other people's poems by identifying other poetic devices they have used and how their definition is similar to yours and how it is different from yours. Remember to spread the love. We all like to receive feedback on our contributions to our community of practice. Okay, so following the instructions, we're going to go to the discussions page. And since this unit is taking place so late in the semester, students will already be familiar with these procedures. But of course, I always include all the details. What is poetry anyways? And the instructions are stated here in the discussion forum as well. Using the poetic device you received in class, create a poem that defines poetry in 5 to 8 lines. Under your poem, state what poetic device you used and briefly explain how you used it. So here, for the purpose of the screencast, I have included an example poem and some sample comments. Whether I include a sample or not depends on the group of students. Sometimes I like to create an example of my own so that students can see what it is I'm meaning, what I'm looking for, especially if it's new information. But sometimes I don't like to include an example because it can get students thinking too narrowly and it can get them to start thinking along my train of thought rather than their own train of thought. Since this is an introductory lesson and one where I'm trying to find out what they already know about poetry and maybe unpack some of their reservations about studying poetry, I probably would not include a sample poem just because I really want them to think outside the box and be confident that they already know the information that I'm looking for. So in this situation, the sample is for the screencast and for the purposes of this lesson plan. So my sample poem, what is poetry? Poetry is life, it is love, it is hate, it is breath, it is death. So here I used hyperbole to over-exaggerate and sort of make fun of poetry. And student tester says, funny, your poem has rhyme at the end, and it's kind of a circle how you start with life and end with death. And then student tester posted his own. It says, poetry is like a storm, always blowing my mind. Poetry is like a foreign language. What did he just say? Poetry is like a maze. How do I get out of here? I used three similes to show that I think poetry is confusing. And then I posted back, your poem is funny too, but you don't seem confused at all. Seems like you and poetry are good friends. Was that personification I just used there? So in my screencast, I have myself interacting with my fake student tester. Whether I interact with the students in the discussion forum or not, I'm not sure if I would do that. Again, it depends on the group, it depends on the topic. Probably in the beginning they're going to need my help in order to generate discussion and see what needs to be done in order to propel a discussion forward. And hopefully by the end they'll need less and less of my input. In the beginning though, I foresee myself as needing to help them out a little bit. And helping them out like this is appropriate for constructivism because it can be seen as scaffolding, and then as students build their own foundation and start to understand what it looks like to be in a community of practice, I can start to remove that scaffolding, and I can be on the outskirts of the community and just watch as they create their own content. So that's task number 1 and task number 2. And again, these are going to be happening in the face-to-face computer lab. So students are going to be physically near each other, and they're also going to be sharing their poems and comments verbally. This discourse I would support because it's only going to add to their cognitive framework about poetry, but I need to remind them to make sure that they're also posting these great ideas under each other's poems so that the poet remembers and knows what comments were made, as well as so I can assess their informal ideas, which are just as valid and important as formal assessments that I would make on formal paragraphs that they're typing up and handing in. Given the organization it takes to get my students down the hall to the computer lab and the length of time it takes for our computers to start up and students to log in, I foresee this as taking about 40 to 45 minutes to get to this point where they have written their poem and commented on 3 people's poems. And at this point, our class is almost done, and this is where I would be posting and revealing task 3 for students. So we're going to go back to the class log to see what task number 3 says. Students can begin to work on task 3, or they can continue to comment on each other's poems, whichever they want. Task 3 is to read Billy Collins' poem, Introduction to Poetry. They need to then write a paragraph that compares and contrasts their poem to his poem. How are they similar? How are they different? How does he use poetic devices to convey his ideas about poetry? What is his purpose? And they need to send this to me as a message to my inbox in Screws within our social network. And of course, in their message, they need to include a copy of their poem so that I can see what it is they're comparing Billy Collins' poem to. I will give them feedback on their message using the Responding to Literature rubric that we have already used in previous literature units, but of course this is a somewhat formal composition and they need to remember to always use English 10 writing conventions. So, Introduction to Poetry by Billy Collins. I ask them to take a poem and hold it up to the light, like a color slide, or press an ear against its hide. I say, drop a mouse into a poem and watch him probe his way out. Or walk inside the poem's room and feel the walls for a light switch. I want them to water ski across the surface of a poem, waving at the author's name on the shore. But all they want to do is tie the poem to a chair with rope and torture a confession out of it. They begin beating it with a hose to find out what it really means. So comparing their little poem that they wrote to Billy Collins' poem, this paragraph will be their first formal literature assessment for the poetry unit. The constructive feedback that I provide them, along with the reflective learning they do in their learning journals, will help them move from a grade 9 ability with critically looking at poetry to hopefully a grade 10 level by the end of the unit, and possibly even beyond. So that's the conclusion of my online constructivism lesson for an introduction to poetry in English 10. Thank you very much for listening.